Welcome to Binge Watchers, where we talk about the stories and characters we love and the shows they live in. My name is Ron, and let's talk about the miniseries and season 1 of Battlestar Galactica. This review is going to be a little bit different just because I have a lot of stuff going on, but I really wanted to talk about this show, but I will be moving around a little bit, so if that bothers you and you prefer like the regular format, we'll be back to that very soon. There are quite a few Battlestar Galacticas out there. I'm talking about the one from 2003, 2004. They did a miniseries first. It's available usually as either 2 hour-and-a-half episodes or as one glorious 3-hour movie. That's how I watched it, and it was a good time. And my question is, where was this show up until now, and why was it not consumed by my face for so many years? Science fiction, especially the spaceships in space type of science fiction, is, I believe, a very complicated genre to get right, to nail down. Very often, the most crucial elements of any story can sort of get lost in the high concept adventure that is a spaceships in space type of show. You focus so much on the sets and the visuals and the weird alien races and the crazy adventures that the crew goes on, all of which are super important and crucial for a good sci-fi show, but you can lose sight of the characters and their arcs and their growth and their motivations. So you can lose sight of the world building, of the systems that actually need to make sense in order for the story to play out. A political or military story that takes place in our world doesn't really require much world building because we're generally familiar with how things work and how these systems work. With sci-fi, where the story is often political and often involves the military, these systems need to be well established. Battlestar Galactica not only does an incredible job setting up the world, it also makes the world feel lived in. The government and military system are rarely explained as exposition. They're referenced. They are talked about in a way that makes sense for both civilians and officials to talk about. So none of it feels like exposition where you just have a character that is only saying something for us to know, so, we know the thing. It feels like watching a living world. Another show that does this very well is The Expanse. So in Battlestar Galactica, humanity inhabits 12 planets. These are the 12 colonies. Caprica City on the Caprica colony is the federal capital of the human government. At some point in the history of mankind, the Cylons were created as robot workers and soldiers. This is fundamentally different from the Cylons in the original Galactica. In the original, they were created by an alien race called Cylons. Very different. I like the new interpretation of it better. The new being, like over 15 years ago. So humans created Cylons. At some point, the Cylons rebelled, there was a war, and then we had about 40 years of relative peace. No one's really heard from the Cylons in that time. The Battlestars are these massive, massive warships, part of the human fleet. The Battlestar Galactica is a very special vessel. It's considered ancient and doesn't really have any networked computers or anything like that because the Cylons can easily manipulate and compromise networks. Listen, I think this is cool stuff. This is what I like. This is like level 10 cool. I'm gonna have to put on my protective cool guy glasses for this. This is stupid. So the Galactica is going to be retired. It's basically gonna be a museum. But then the Cylons attack and wipe out Caprica and pretty much all the other colonies. All that's left of humanity are the ships that happened to be in space when the attack happened. All the other Battlestars were destroyed easily by the Cylons because their onboard networks were hacked. Battlestar Galactica is now the only military force left to protect what remains of humanity. Now you tell me, is that not a fantastic setup? The whole deal with the Cylons turning against humans goes much deeper than just the robots are evil now. I won't get too much into it because maybe some of you, like me, are only discovering this show now, but how much the show explores the Cylons, their relationship with humans, their motivations is a key strength of this story. The Cylons are not evil because they're the bad guys and that's it. Like in any war, both sides think they're doing the right thing. As season 1 progresses and the fleet of cruise ships, transports, and other civilian vessels that are the last of humanity find sort of a rhythm to running away from the Cylons, politics begins. Commander Adama is the senior officer on the Galactica, and the new president of the 12 colonies, who's a politician who was like 43rd in line for the presidency and just happened to be the only one left alive, they pretty much have to run the new government. They need to establish a new form of government. And looking at all of this from the outside, you could think that the people, as a collective, should focus more on surviving and less on questioning the people who are trying to keep them alive. But that is simply not how something like this would happen in the real world. So the whole political discourse of Battlestar Galactica, to me, just made perfect sense. And as the season moves on, you learn more about the mythology and religion of this world, which I thought was just fascinating. Their religion is heavily inspired by Greek mythology with an interplanetary twist. So once you get to the end of season 1 and you start to see where they're going with this, my mind was blown. It's brilliant. You'll be sitting there like, yeah, this show knows what it's doing. And on top of all of that, you have a strong cast of characters and stories that happen between them. Sci-fi, especially this kind of sci-fi, is always big. Just like fantasy, it always happens on an epic scale. Battlestar Galactica is no different. You have multiple planets, there are space battles, there's a lot going on in every single episode and definitely across the whole season. But the show never loses sight of the smaller stories. We don't focus on too many characters at once because there are a lot of them. There's a big cast. But the characters we do focus on, like Adama, Starbuck, Apollo, Baltar, Laura, you get surprisingly intimate with these characters and how their stories affect one another. Now, to say that this show doesn't suffer from any post-90s type of TV thing, no. The occasional cringy performance happens and the occasional cheesy writing happens. Some characters will have stiff performances that you'd expect out of the early 2000s. And the difference in quality between the more experienced and less experienced performers is noticeable. But to be honest, I didn't mind any of it because the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts when it comes to this show. The visual effects I thought actually held up surprisingly well. They do get pretty clever with it, and they do make sure that you don't stare at one 2003 CGI spaceship for too long. So there's a lot of movement and tricks with lights and shadows to kind of cover up bad old CGI. But generally, the design of this show is incredible, especially on board the Galactica. This is an old warship. Its thing is having outdated tech, so the result is this almost old, under-stylized vision of the future. It's a spaceship that has fax machines on it. I love it. It's awesome. Bottom line, if you haven't, should you watch it? If you're a sci-fi fan, I'd say it's a no-brainer. Absolutely watch this show. It didn't feel like it was following a pattern. It felt like it was blazing a path. It felt very much like it was doing its own original thing, even as a reimagining of an older franchise. The show doesn't let the scale of the story distract from the world and the character building, and it doesn't rely or doesn't heavily rely on sci-fi tropes to move the story along. I mean, the tropes are there. There are things in this show that are, better or for worse staples of shows like this. But Battlestar Galactica just weaves such an intricate story that involves complicated politics and religion and fundamental differences of opinion about how the world works. So I'd say pretty relatable stuff. Just, in space. As of making this video, I'm about halfway through season 2 and I'm excited to keep watching. There is a lot of it though, so I don't expect to keep watching it at the pace that I am now. This is not going to become a Battlestar Galactica only channel yet. So for you sci-fi fans out there who for whatever reason haven't watched this show yet, just like me, watch this show with your face. What about you? Have you watched Battlestar Galactica? Any version of it? What were your thoughts about it? And also, what's your favorite spaceships in space type of show? If you're gonna be talking about spoilers, please use spoiler tags in your comments. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps out a lot, and you can find me on Twitter and Instagram and TV Time, and links to everything down below. You can also join our Discord server where we chat about TV, and it's a lot of fun. But if you're finding Binge Watchers for the first time, welcome. I'd like to invite you to join the Binge Watchers community. Come talk about TV with us. It's a lot of fun. Subscribe to the channel. But in any case, keep binging, and I will see you in space.